We're now going to pull up a text starting with chapter 4 of the book of Genesis. Be patient, if you will, as I pull up the documents. From this little text, this chapter, we're going to start with the following themes. And let me just throw these out because there's a lot of them. And just to give you an overview, isn't it fascinating of all the stuff that you can get from a simple one chapter? There are a couple of overriding themes. Number one, how God is portrayed here. Many find this absolutely beyond acceptable. Others say, this is the way God is, get over it. You need to get yourself in line. This is divine reality. Others are saying, you got to be kidding. These are a bunch of folk tales put together with some obvious biases. Number one. Another overlying theme is inconvenient truths. And I have no idea what this circle is here. What is this circle here? Why is that? I have no idea what this circle came from. Another thing is inconvenient truths. Let me see if I can get rid of that for a moment. I have no idea where that came from. Okay. All right, inconvenient truths. There are some inconvenient truths that you need to be aware of here. One inconvenient truth is, where do we come from? Where do we come from? And a lot of people, when they get their DNA, are shocked to see where they come from. Let me explain that in a just kind of a stop the share here for a moment. When my students and I have a class, the first two classes I ask, would you be interested in sharing your DNA if you've done your DNA? I make it obviously very voluntary. And then I say, for those of you who don't have DNA, would you be interested in sharing where your great-great-grandparents came from? Usually it starts out slow and then it snowballs. And this is interesting to see how kids right now absolutely enjoy what they're finding. It's also interesting to see what their parents of a different generation are absolutely horrified. Typical of this is when we have students from the Iberian Peninsula in their heritage, and they come to Miami 2 or 3 generations earlier, and they come in and they do their DNA, and they get Iberian Peninsula, but then they go, oh my heavens, I got all this African. And so they wind up Moroccan, Mali, and Senegal. And they also wind up with a chunk Irish. And so I say to my students, if they're from Cuba, I say, did you ever notice in your Cuban-American friends, you've got some Cuban-Americans who have red hair and blue eyes and red hair and freckles, or really, really interesting black hair that's shiny and freckles and very white skin? They said, yeah. Okay, so let me explain this to you. Who was in the Iberian Peninsula for 700 years? We have a scratch your head. Oh, you know. I said, yeah, they're called Berbers. Moors is a slur word. Berbers are tribesmen from the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. Oh, I said, yes. And they were in 700 years. But if you're on one side of the mountain, is it natural to trade for people on the other side of the mountain? They go, yeah. And I said, on the other side is Mali. And anchoring Mali is the very, very, very famous trading center of Timbuktu. But you know, if you're in the land, you have to go to the water. And who's on the water? Senegal. So you get the Morocco, you get Mali, you get Senegal. These people intermarry, and they will wind up also in Spain, where people intermarry. 700 years. They go, oh, where's the Irish come from? I said, this goes interestingly well, too. The Irish Roman Catholics rebelled against those nasty English Protestants like clockwork every 50 years. And they lost. But who got to get off the island? The wealthy. And where did the wealthy go? France and Spain. Ah, yes, there were so many Irish expatriates in the Napoleonic Wars that 2 full brigades of the Spanish army were all Irish expatriates. And guess where a big chunk of them migrated to? Cuba. Yes. So when you see a chunk Irish, you see a chunk African, and you start listing this, and then you see Iberian Peninsula, and then you're also going to find probably something from Lebanon or the Levant, because people traded all over the Mediterranean. And if they did that, don't be surprised if you find some Chinese, because where did people trade? Marco Polo. Where did Marco go? And before that, the famous Silk Road to China. They come back from Italy over to Spain. You get all of that. I pull up a map and show everybody, go, oh, that is cool. Their parents are having a fit. What do you mean, Africa? I said, that's the way it goes, folks. My latest DNA shows that I've got 30% Inuit. That came as a surprise. And a chunk Andean. Why? Because I'm Native. My grandfather was full-blooded Native American, but evidently goes back much further in his bloodlines than we realized. So I'm just saying, when you pull this up, now Carol Ryder, some of you may remember Carol Ryder. Carol Ryder had the greatest comment. She said, wouldn't it be terrific if with every birth certificate, you mandated your DNA with it? And I said, so you couldn't detach it. So you got your birth certificate, and then you had to see exactly where you're from. That would upset a lot of very, very, very racist people on all sides, because it shows that there is more people. I call this euphemistically, people have moments. Some moments are out of love. Some moments are on the spot, and some are nasty, but they have moments and they leave results. Those results become interesting about how they get passed down in our DNA. I don't know if I mentioned this. Did I mention to you what happened with the mess up in the heart transplant team with my medication? Did I mention that? Okay, now I didn't hear this. I went to get a prescription refilled. You may have heard of Fosamax. Fosamax? Yeah, Fosamax, you're only supposed to be on 25 years. I was on it 26. Yeah, you heard that. And I didn't tell anybody this, but I developed an incredibly bad rash on my arms and my legs. I had to get a PCP. The first thing they screamed is, get off of that. My cardiologist had a fit. I've been off of it 2 weeks. The rash is almost gone. My metabolism saved me again. I got that from DNA, from somebody long, long ago, passed down a super high metabolism that has saved me from the toxicity of the medicines I'm on. So we bring things with us from someplace else that can save our lives. Just a quick reminder. Remember, people did survive the plague. Remember those horrible plagues that happened not only in the Middle Ages in Europe, but if you read Asian history, they happen in Asia too, where they usually started and then go west. People survived. Those people who survived interbred, and they passed on genes of survivors who survived plagues. So a lot of times we find, much to our horror, we've got a very bad gene, but also much to our surprise, we've got something that's been passed on that we had no idea about. So when people say to me, Kenneth, you are lucky, I said, actually, what I'm lucky about is that people somewhere in my ancestry, somebody passed on to me a very high metabolism. And that was nothing I had to do with that. I wish I could take credit for what I'm able to do with the transplant, but actually it's my ancestors that passed on an absolutely essential gene to metabolize the very toxicity of the medicine I'm on. I had nothing to do with that. So I'm just sharing this, all this stuff counts. So the inconvenient truths of where you came from is a problem for the Israelites. When Israel becomes a country, they not only did not want to, they wanted to give this great idea that God, Yahweh, was the great God of Mount Zion. Inconveniently, people remembered that the first encounter with the word Yah was not in Jerusalem. It wasn't even in the land of Canaan. This comes as a big shock. The first encounter with the word Yah as a God is in Midian, which is northwest Arabia. Ooh. Was God, Yah, first encountered in Jerusalem on Mount Zion? No, another inconvenient truth, way down on the Sinai Peninsula, somewhere called Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb. Nobody wanted to remember that. Nobody wanted to remember that because that interfered with our nice box. We are from Mount Zion. We are here in Jerusalem. We are anchored here in the great land of Canaan. This is where we're anchored. But somebody remembered that long, long ago, that's not where we came from, and that's not where we got our names. Ooh, and that becomes very inconvenient. So how is God portrayed? That becomes a major question in this story. Inconvenient truths. Where are we from? That's a big question. How do we get what we are? That's a big question. Now, it's interesting. My kids love this mix. They think it's very interesting. Their parents do not. Their parents are absolutely horrified. One final thing, and I hope you get a kick out of this, before COVID broke and we had to go online, I'll never forget this, and I hope you could get the visualization. I had these two first cousins from Jamaica. And these guys could have been models. They were 6'1". By the way, the nicest guys you ever met. They were 6'1". They could have been models. So they were in class, and we were joking around, said, I need to borrow you two. So I said to the whole class, we're talking about 35 students in summer B. And I said, look, guys, you got to be very careful about the judgments you make just by looking at somebody. I said, look at these two guys. Aside from the fact that it looks like Pharaoh Khufu is between the two of them, some ancient thing, I said, look at us. Does it look on your appearance that we have anything in common? And the class said, this is a trick. We know it is, because obviously you do, but we can't figure out what. I mean, you're obvious. These two are handsome and you are. I said, careful, careful. And they said, you know, you get the picture. I said, yeah. This is why you have to be very careful about making snap judgments, because you may find out you don't like yourself. I said, guess what we have in common? And the two guys laughed and laughed. I said, do you want to tell them, or do I want to? I said, you tell them. They said, one of them said, we're all Scots. The class said, what? How could you possibly be? You're Jamaican. They said, you know nothing about Jamaica. And they laughed again. Half of Jamaica has Scots ancestry. And I had to explain, if you are a British officer and you survived India or survived the Boer Wars in South Africa and you retired, did you want to go back to cold, wet, miserable Scotland, or did you want to go to Jamaica? Hello, who survived goes to Jamaica, and guess who they married? Islander girls. Yes, and they had tons of kids. And the two cousins are laughing and saying, yes, he got it. And they rattle off all kinds of names that they're cousins, all Scots names. Gray, McGregor, etc. And they're all Jamaican. Now, by the way, if any of you are Chinese, you probably will know there's a lot of Chinese in Jamaica too. I'm just saying the world is wild. So having said that, our backgrounds are far more, and our names for things. Not only is it inconvenient that Yah comes from a land in Arabian Peninsula, which is interesting. The word El is Canaanite. Originally, the word Israel, let El rule. That's what it originally meant way, way, way back when it was getting started. It was understood Israel was the original word way back when. And you'll notice in the Hebrew Bible, and Nanette, nobody's ever explained this to me, how come so many Hasidics have this B-A-A-L in their name? Baal was El's son, the storm god. So ultimately, as you become more monotheistic, you merge El and Yah, and you get Yahweh Elohim. But you're taking two very, very, very different backgrounds, two very different geographies, and ultimately you become one, which is fine, which is nice to know where they started. And sometimes that's very inconvenient. Now, on top of all of this, we haven't gotten to the text yet. We have the big thing that happened in this country as well, farmers versus herdsmen. What do you do with cattle drivers, people on the move, sheep and goats versus those who plant crops? Doesn't mix. What do you do when your herds of goats, sheep, or whatever decide your plants look good and they start eating them up? Not good. The famous frontier fights in this country between farmers and ranchers and just unbelievable. Another one. What do you do when you have the firstborn and those who rebel against what goes to the privileges of the firstborn? It seems Homo sapiens, as a rule, think that the firstborn gets everything. There is great honor to the firstborn, the others good luck. It wasn't just in England. All the rest of the countries in Europe did the same thing. The firstborn inherited the goods. The second, if it's a son, winds up going in the military, right? And the third get dumped in the clergy, whatever the clergy are, and God forbid help the poor daughters. They have to get married off to who's ever convenient. Oh, I am so glad I'm not a woman for the treatment that women got. And of course, some boys too. Imagine, I cannot imagine being forced into marriage to somebody, because it means that his land and his land will be bigger land, and the kids suck it up. This is for the bigger good. We've become powerful now. I mean, the idea of individuality is out the window. So the whole idea of firstborn, do they get everything? And rebellions and displacement by those not firstborn, all of these get in this. And then what do you do with texts that don't make sense? All of these are involved in this one chapter. All of this. Oh, really? There's an Orthodox Jewish prayer that men give thanks that they were not born a woman. I would, as you know, make a terrible woman. I wouldn't put up with the crap. Nobody would marry me. I wouldn't put up with the crap that women are supposed to. I wouldn't put up with that forever. I will say one thing, by the way, before we get to the text. One thing I can say that my mother did, amongst many good things, is that at the age of 12, and some of you have heard the story, I got a spick and span box, an old t-shirt, and a galvanized bucket. And my mother said, it's about time you learn to clean the floors. And we're gonna have you learn to clean the dishes. And I said, mouthy as usual, we have a maid. She says to me, the maid is not your wife, or whoever, if anybody will marry you. The maid is for me. Your wife is not your maid. Your wife is not your cook. Your wife is not your slave. So you're going to learn to cook. You're going to learn to wash dishes. You're going to learn to clean the floors, and you're going to learn to carry your half. And that's what she did. And that's what my brother did. And Maria Teresa will tell you that one of the things that one of the things she will tell you is that the first shock she got over was that I insisted we divide everything. I would not let her do my laundry. I would not let her do this. I would not let her say, no, 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 it's not fair. She liked that. She said, I can't believe this. Then she says to her friends, if Kenneth goes, I'm not putting up with anything else. I've been spoiled. Another thing, by the way, very quickly, we go to get married, and I said to the banker, we want everything in all of our joint names. So the banker said to me, listen, he says, you want to put your wife's name on your money? I'm serious. That's exact. Yes. Yes. In 1999, he said, you want to put your wife's? I said, why would I marry somebody if I couldn't trust them with my money? I said, am I naive? I don't understand that. I said, besides, we don't have any money anyway. But the point is, we help each other out. So if I go, she doesn't have to worry about probate. I said, I've got a heart transplant. I need to make sure that everything is set up for her now, not die and then let her pick up the pieces. So the idea of 50-50, well, it's obviously not. Some things I do a lot of, some things she does a lot, but the point is we share everything. And so back in the day, nobody would marry me. Somebody comes in, working all day while I've worked all day, puts their feet up, has something to drink, expects me to cook, wash the dishes, take care of the dogs, clean the floors, and then be a sex addict in bed. Are you out of your mind? I would have strangled him. I mean, I would have made a terrible woman. I'd still make a terrible one. Put out that crap for a minute. So let's go back. This is how this text again, Inconvenient Truths. How is God portrayed? Herdsmen versus farmers, displacement of the firstborn, inconvenient truths all over the place. Let's take a look at this text. All right. Now, the man, let me see if I can make this a little larger. It's not coming up larger. Let's see. Okay. All right, all right. Okay, I guess this is the way. I can't get any larger. Okay. Now, the man knew his wife Eve. This is a very, very old phrase, knew. We're not sure. The Jewish commentator, Robert Alder, says it got, how do you say, had sexual relationships with, how do you say, he said it gets embarrassing for many, many people. So the old King James English at the time was to use the word knew. So in English translations, they still say the word know means to know intimately. It's implied to know intimately. So the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain. Now, Cain, by the way, means metal worker, for what it's worth, metal worker, saying, I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. Next, she bore his brother Abel. Now, Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a tiller of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel, for his part, brought the firstlings of his flock, their fat portions. Now, if you've never read the story before, it looks very simple. Somebody's offering the fruit of the ground. Somebody's offering something cheap. It's what's the issue? That's the first time I remember reading it. Still, what's the issue? And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. Now, I remember the first time I read this, and I thought, I don't like this God. Why would God do that? Now, this gets to be a good theological question for everybody. Now, I know in this group, it's really not a question, but you get to see right from the very beginning, when you have a text like this, are you free to say, I don't like this, versus those who immediately say, and I don't know why we do this, once something is written down, the famous word is, it is written. And usually with the phrase, it is written, it's understand you take this literally. They seem to go hand in hand. And literally means this is the way God is. If there's a problem, you're the problem, not God. There's a famous hymn, God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps on the sea, he rides upon the storm. Blind unbelief is sure to blind unbelief is sure to scan his works in vain. God is his own interpreter, he will make it plain. The understanding is God will make it plain in God's time. If you don't understand it, you're the problem, not God's the problem. You're a mere mortal. These are divine words given by God to Moses. These are divinely written. First 5 books are divinely written by God to Moses. Moses is simply the instrument writing them down. This is what Orthodox Judaism believes. This is what fundamentalist Protestants believe. This is the literal word of God. The writers are simply the instruments. Okay, so your job is to believe God. If you don't understand it, it's your problem, not God's problem. Versus those of us who read the story and say, I don't like this. How do you have the freedom? Don't assume that you have freedom, because in a lot of countries you don't. And if you have freedom, you have to hide it. Try to argue this with certain theocracies. And notice, if you will, there is an attempt now, once again, in our history in this country, to impose upon us a theological orthodoxy. Again, attempt at those. So you read this, and theological orthodoxy would say, this is the word of God. You must accept this. Versus those who say, hey, it's a story. And I don't happen to like the way this God is presented. This God doesn't do anything for me. That would be considered blasphemy. We'd all be burned at the stake, exiled, or both. But it's a fair question. Does God look fair? What? So Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Now, why would any God ask that? Duh. You accepted one over the other. You gave no explanation, and you ask why somebody's angry. It doesn't make sense. Why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? Well, what did Cain do wrong that wasn't well? It's like a professor saying, I don't like this. And you get a grade. You say, well, you didn't tell me what you wanted. How am I supposed to know what you wanted to get a good grade? By the way, that used to happen to me a lot in class. Professor would come in and get mad at the class and say, the papers were awful. And I was always usually the one who raised my hand and say, well, you didn't tell us exactly what you wanted on the papers. You just said, write on this topic, and we didn't. Now you tell us you didn't like it, but you didn't give any guidelines. I don't see any guidelines here. He gets mad. He says, well, if you do well, how are you supposed to know it's well? Who did you have at this point? You didn't have any 10 commandments. You didn't have any laws of Noah. You had no social contracts. You had Adam and Eve, and you had your brother, you, and you. That's it. There was nobody there telling you what to do. So why are you angry? Why is your count? If you do well, will you not be accepted? Why didn't he accept him to begin with? How many issues of religion have evolved around acceptance. Core values. Am I worthy? Am I acceptable? Notice when Jesus gave the old rabbinic comment, love your neighbor as yourself, you have to start with loving yourself. And everybody forgets that. Acceptance becomes accepting with who and what we are, messy and all that it is. Am I right? So the acceptance thing here is a big issue as well. What do you mean by do accept? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. Now, you know, interesting enough, this has to be a much, much later story because you're talking about acceptance. You're talking about accepting one thing over another. You're talking about sin. How would you even know what sin is? Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, that's all you had. That's all you had. So I'm asking everybody here, what is your response as you look at first fruits of the ground, veggies, good things, vegetables, everything else versus a sheep? How do you respond to that? See, Roy made it in. How do you feel about that? Does anybody have any response to that?
Okay. Well, I mean, it's the very, it's like that anthropomorphic God who, walked in the Garden of Eden in the cool of the day and asked, Adam what he was doing. It's like God is sort of a pretty fickle kind of superhuman type. And I don't particularly like it, but I understand it for what it is.
Yeah, I get that. It is what it is, but I don't get it is what I get. It's just I don't understand why God wouldn't like, this is just me. I don't understand why God wouldn't like vegetables from the garden. I just don't get that. I just don't get that. Obviously, to my mind, whoever wrote this was prejudiced. They were big into herds, big into this, big into that. And of course, with a lot of herds comes a lot of money. Remember, herds produces more money. Yes, Nanette.
The thought that came to my mind was, could it have had something to do with the fact that the herdsman was raising meat, and meat was considered not, in Eden times, but biblical times, to be more important, the proteins more important than the vegetables of the ground. And it's also considered to be a masculine rather than feminine.
Manly men eat meat. You, whatever you are, eat veggies. Well, manly men eat meat.
So when the stories were written, the man who tilled the ground was doing women's work. Less acceptable.
Roy, by the way, good morning to you. Good morning to you, and congratulations on the birth of your grandchild. And would you tell us how you correctly pronounce the name of the holiday today?
Eid?
Yes, the whole thing.
Eid.
Yeah, but isn't it?
I don't know.
Huh?
Well, I'm sorry, what was your question? Is it what?
It's Eid something else and something else.
Yeah, I'm not, this is something I'm not schooled in. I don't know.
Okay, Eid.
I mean, this is the one that follows the Hajj.
Right.
And people say Eid Mubarak, which means blessed Eid.
Okay.
Eid.
I think it's pronounced Eid al-Adha.
Well, we'll say Eid. We'll all go with Eid. Okay, get an Eid after Ramadan and Eid after the Hajj. Okay. All right, so good morning, Roy. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So, you take a look at that. That's an interesting thing. So obviously the person has, we should say obviously, a good point is the person telling the story has a point of view, a kind of hidden agenda that obviously we want the manly man, the meat, the stuff that makes warriors. Warriors don't live on veggies. You have to have meat. Meat makes money too. Meat takes ground. This is the same thing we ran into cattle versus wheat and farming in the Midwest. Vegans need not apply. Sorry. Okay, so let's go back then. Okay, here we are. So Cain said to his brother Abel, let us go out to the field. Ah, the field. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said, where is your brother Abel? Now, Danny Sorkin was right when he said, again, this is very, very similar. It's exactly the same when you get God saying to Adam, where are you? You get the same motif again. Where is your brother Abel? The anthropomorphic God. And by the way, let me also point out again that in terms of God talk and God theology, the idea that God was all-knowing and all-powerful comes after these stories were first spoken and written. And most people forget their timelines in doing theology. People did not, 3,000 years ago, the argument is that these stories were probably circulating a good 500 to 1,000 years before they were written down. The Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel story, we're guessing, were written down about 1,000 to 900 BCE. This comes much before the identification of God, or Yahweh, or Elohim, or Yahweh Elohim, being all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-creating. That definition, that description will come later. So in this case, God doesn't know. When you hear people saying, well, of course God did, that's showing they really don't understand theological timelines. And we tend to forget, we collapse timelines, which does not help. Okay, here we go. Where is your brother Abel? And Cain said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? That famous, famous line. And the Lord said, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. Now let's stop for a moment. Let's stop. If we were traditionalists and we said God is all powerful and God is all knowing, that means that God had to know by definition that Cain would kill Abel. Then why? If God is all powerful, why didn't God stop Cain from killing Abel? I'm serious about this. When somebody says to me, well, obvious God is this and not that, I say, well, that doesn't square with some of the biblical stories. And then I'm told again, this is your problem, not the story's problem. So you see this is doing theology. How would your God be involved in this? In what way? If you believe in some kind of divine reality, and I would say divine reality, one way of pushing that is what gets us out of me, myself, and I, and grounds us beyond the ego and our own personhood. What grounds us? Is there something that connects us with something beyond? And so what have you done, your brothers? Now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. Now, do you remember this is also similar to what happened at the end of the Garden of Eden? Let me pull that up for a minute. And cursed is the ground because of you. In toil shall you eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles shall bring forth to you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. Cursed is the ground because of you. That happened with Adam and Eve, and we're seeing it again now with the same story of Cain and Abel. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your blood, your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Today you have driven me away from the soil, and I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and anyone who meets me may kill me. Wait a minute. What is wrong with that? Anyone who meets me may kill me. Does anybody see what's wrong with that? Anybody?
Yes. Supposedly there was just Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel.
Thank you. Yes. Like, where do they come from? I mean, yes, it gets worse. Well, Robert Alter says it is, this is like talking about the former prime minister in the United Kingdom. You make things up as you go along, and if it doesn't work to you just plow on ahead. Robert Alter says there is no way you can at all say there is any consistency in this story whatsoever. It's out the window. There just simply isn't any consistency at all. Anyone who meets me. Then the Lord said to him, not so. Whoever kills Cain. Well, who is the whoever? Whoever kills Cain will suffer sevenfold vengeance. Now, I want you to remember Cain is a word from a group called Kenites. Just kind of remember that in the back of your head. Cain is a word from the group Kenites. Kenites are also known as Midianites. They're related. They're the same. The land of Midian is in northwest Arabia. And where did Moses go? When he fled, he went to the land of Midian. And he met a high priest whose name was Ruel or Jethro, and he married the high priest's daughter whose name was Zipporah, and they had 2 kids. And who was the God, the high priest, the God of? The God of Yah. Y-A-H. Now you're getting it. The Kenites were famous for being fierce. And so it was understood that they did not accept the common law, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a death for a death. If you killed a member of the tribe, they exacted sevenfold. They were infamous for this. The argument amongst secular scholars is whoever kills will suffer sevenfold vengeance. This is an attempt to explain why is this group so vengeful. Nobody does 7 for 1, but they did. Cain is a riff off of Kenite. Kenites were from the land of Midian. Midian's god was Yah. It had nothing to do with Jerusalem, nothing to do with Mount Zion, nothing to do with the royal city of David. It was further south. But the god is Yah. And who did Moses marry? The high priest's daughter. And when Moses got in trouble, what does the text say? He called his father-in-law in to help him settle some of the problems he was having. And it was his father-in-law, the high priest, that said to him, you must divide things up. You must get help. You can't do it all yourself. So the first counsel and wisdom he got was from a pagan high priest of the mountain gods, of the mountain god Yah in Midian. This becomes very embarrassing if you're Orthodox. What do you mean, God, mountains, God, Yah? What is all of this? But the book of Exodus remembers this, remembers Midian, remembers Genesis, remembers stories that there was this mountain god. And who did Moses marry first? Does anybody remember what happened to Moses' first wife? No. He sent her away. Doesn't say why, he just said he sent her away. So we don't know why he sent her away. And guess what? For a group that's so good about genealogy, nobody tells us about his sons. We have names for the 2 sons, but that's it. The sin of omission. And then what else does Moses do when it comes time to marital strife? Does anybody else remember who Moses marries? We talked about this in class a little while ago. Does anybody remember what Cush is? Cush is Ethiopia. And so Ethiopia means you're dark, you're of color, you're African, you're Black. Moses marries a Cushite woman. And in the book of Numbers, chapter 12, his sister and brother give him grief because of his Cushite woman, and God intervenes. So Moses first marries a pagan high priest's daughter. Then he sends her away, and ultimately later on in life will marry a Black woman, an African woman from Cush, from Ethiopia, as his wife. Don't you just love this? And isn't it interesting how nobody remembers this? Selective memory. It's inconvenient. when you're trying to point out how pure you are, you don't want to mention these parts of your background that are in your DNA because it's inconvenient. So this is a long history of inconvenience. The Kenites, this is an attempt to explain these people who we have a distant relationship. Why are they behaving the way they behave? That's not the way we behave. So when you see this book here, written by a famous professor, James Kugel, if I can get this to you. James Kugel taught Hebrew Bible, Old Testament at Harvard University for, I think, 3 or 4 decades. He's Orthodox Jewish. And he says, whether I'm Orthodox or not, these stories are attempts to explain things. Just like Gunkel said, these are attempts to explain. They knew they had this God Yah, and people would not let them forget where that word came from. It's not our word. It's from below. It's from the pagans. It's from the mountains, and it's from Arabia. And we're not going to let you forget that. And Moses' first encounter with divine reality is not on Mount Zion. It's in Mount Sinai, which is in the Sinai Peninsula somewhere, or Mount Horeb, way south. These are inconvenient because writing in exile, the priests and the Deuteronomists have this story they want to construct about who we are and where we came from. Unfortunately, there are these texts out there that won't go away. Texts that mention a Cushite woman, that mentions Zipporah, that mentions his father, mentions where they're from. Moses' encounter is not on Mount Zion. It's in Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb, deep somewhere in the Sinai Peninsula. And they won't go away. Inconvenient truths. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, that so no one who came upon him would kill him. Now, let me just throw something out here for a minute. If you hear the phrase, the mark of Cain, what does that usually summon up? Is usually a bad mark? Think about it. You have the mark of Cain.
Yeah, a real bad mark.
Yeah, okay, a real bad mark. Okay, what is a mark? We don't know. It's assumed it's some kind of either an indentation or a color of some type, of ink of some type, a tattoo of some type, something that makes you stand out, that you can physically see. That is the implication, according to the commentators. A brand, if you will, a kind of brand, yes. Something that stands out. So when you see you know you have that. And, we used to, by the way, that's not, remember how in the Middle Ages, if you were a liar or if you were an adulterer, or if you got caught stealing, they would brand you. Danny is right. That's what we say today. It's a bad thing. But notice that's not what the text is. The text says it's a mark of protection. It's a good mark. Look what it says. And the Lord put a mark on Cain that so no one who came upon him would kill him. It's a protection mark. It's a protection mark, not a bad mark. It's to protect him. And somehow we've twisted it away in our folk religion that it's a bad thing, when here it's a good thing. It protects him. Right up there with the apple rather than the pomegranate and fig tree and other grapes. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of wandering. The land of Nod means wandering, east of Eden. Now, Danny, would you read these next 4 words for us, nice and loudly?
Cain knew his wife.
Ah, yes.
Who the blank was his wife? Where did she come from? Did he
Precisely. Thank you, Maureen, for pointing out
mom?
the obvious.
Have you anybody remember the movie Inherit the Wind?
Yes, that was the famous Scopes trial. That was where Danny, where Clarence Darrow went against William Jennings Bryan. Yes.
Right. And Spencer Tracy, who's playing the guy who's really supposed to be Clarence Darrow.
Right.
Has like the was it Frederick March, the William Jennings Bryan character on the stand? And he reads, and Cain knew his wife. Where the hell did she come from? And he says, who? He says, who? Her, Cain's wife. You think there was another act of creation in some other county that nobody mentioned?
I remember one of my.
Or was Cain's wife Eve, or did Eve have a daughter, and did he shtup
No,
his
no,
wife, or did he shtup his
no.
mom, or did he shtup his sister?
No. When we read more of this, Adam and Eve are still on by themselves. They're still a couple. They did not have any other children. It's just Adam and Eve. Cain and Abel. They will have a child soon, whose name will be Enoch, but they don't have any daughters. So the whole thing becomes an absolute thing like Eve. Who are the people who are going to kill him? And then Eve. Robert Alter, in his commentary, and I use Alter a lot because he's a very, very famous Jewish commentator, he said, this just proves beyond any doubt this person had no sense of consistency, simply just didn't care, threw words together and let him move on. He just barged ahead. You know, it's kind of like bluffing. I'm telling a story. Shut up already. Let me go with my story. Well, no, Maureen, it's interesting. That'd be a fun story, interesting story, wild story. We'd all get arrested. But no, there is just at this point, it's all it is, very simple. Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, that's it.
The only like biblical explanation I can think of is to go back to refer to the other creation story, the 7 days story, where it says something like God created male and female, created he them. So because it's from that other creation story where he created a whole bunch of people at once.
Yeah, the problem with that
is consistent, but at least you can refer back to something in Genesis.
Okay, the problem with Danny is that story comes 500 years later. So between the writing of that story, you've got 500 years of wandering in the desert. Where did she come from? That story, maybe part of that story is to help correct this. Interestingly enough, good point, Danny. But meanwhile, you've got to worry. And then Maureen mentions Lilith. Now, Lilith is the first feminist and gets nailed. But guess what? Nowhere does she appear in the scripture text as we have them. That is a parallel story. And it's loaded with misogyny. And it's interesting how many people in this misogynistic idea, a woman speaks her mind and gets kicked out. His maid is told to leave, get kicked out of the garden for speaking her mind. It's interesting how many people know the story of Lilith more than they know Eve. Or every time, it's funny also when, by the way, I have something to tell you interesting, by the way. It's cropped up now in the last several weeks. There is requests now coming in when I restart the Old Testament class again, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. For those of you who don't remember this, 7 years ago, Miami-Dade College decided they needed to make more money. So they instituted my academic program, my MAP, because there were too many people taking too many interesting electives to further and broaden their education. Your job is to get in, get out, go. Get in, get out, go. The more they get in, get out, go, the more money you make. So none of these electives in which you're trying to broaden your scope of knowledge. So I taught Old Testament, New Testament religion in the US and world religion. They also said if you don't teach one of your electives for 90 days, you have to reapply to be a professor. 90 days you don't teach, you're out. So this way they would get rid of, I'm serious, this way they got rid of 90% of the cool electives that weren't in somebody's major. The first round, by the second semester, almost all of the electives were gone, except my world religion. It stayed on, oddly enough, by word of mouth. They were required by law to keep it on the books, and they were required that if students signed up for it, they had to let them in the class. The idea was if advisors do not mention the class to students, they won't know about it, they won't take it, therefore I won't be able to teach the class, therefore the class will not exist except on book, and I will be out of a job because all the rest. But the kids kept talking about it and talking. The chairman of the department thought that was a riot. The dean loved it too, because basically the kids said, this is a class we really like. Now it's interesting. The comeback has been, the chair said, there's talk about people want to take more religion class. And she said, you're crushing it. Nobody comes close to what we're offering here. The word is coming back. Do you think he might be interested in talking about Old Testament again? I thought that was fascinating, just fascinating. So I can put it together. I saved the stuff. Thank heavens I saved stuff. I ran on a flash drive. I was able to pull it up.
I still wish we could audit your class. I would pay to audit your class, but it's not an option.
I know they don't do that. So I'm just saying that Danny came a good point there. Daniel, I never thought about that. This is why I like doing something like this, because I learn. I hope you do realize if you're a good teacher, you're a student. The object is you learn too. Danny's talking about we created male and female. That is an antidote to the Genesis story of Adam and Eve. That's an interesting point, Daniel. That is a really, really, really interesting point because it does make an antidote. Male and female, we created them. Yes, an antidote. Okay, let's go back to the text. So we've got Eve, Lilith. I'm not sure when Lilith begins. I should have looked that up. I'm not sure when the story of Lilith actually begins in stories. Pat, can you look that up? Does anybody here have a laptop in front of them? Maureen, do you have your laptop up? Next time we'll look it up. Next time, let's look up where Lilith begins because it becomes a parallel story to Eve. It's like Lilith represents women having identity, authenticity, and ability to think for themselves. Thank you very much. Eve, nice, sweet, but goes along with what she's told. My experience is what does it say? Daniel, what does it say? Anybody?
I pasted it. I didn't really have time to read it. Okay, let's see what it says. All right. Lilith, female figure in Mesopotamian and Judaic mythology, alternatively the first wife of Adam and supposedly the primordial she-demon. Lilith is cited as having been banished from the Garden of Eden for not complying with and obeying Adam. She is mentioned in biblical Hebrew in the book of Isaiah. Okay, I didn't write this.
Okay, stop for a minute. Before you go back, where was she meant? What does it give a dating for Mesopotamia in terms of timeline? Annette, did you find it?
I found something different. Although the figure of Lilith is commonly found in Jewish folklore and the Midrash, the origin of Lilith is as a Sumerian succubus. The first Jewish story of Lilith was told in the alphabet of Ben Sirah. Before the introduction of the alphabet of Ben Sirah, Lilith was mostly seen as a demoness instead of the first Eve.
Son of a gun, how did she morph from coming from a Sumerian woman demon into well, if you've ever studied.
She sounds like a very interesting person. I'd like to know her.
Yeah, we have to do some research on her.
Yeah, and tell her she can welcome at All Souls. We'd like to talk to her. She's welcome. I'm
still trying to, Dr. Claus, I'm still trying to figure out where did Cain's wife come from?
We don't know. No. Robert Alter says the guy simply wasn't paying attention. He was not interested in consistency. Robert Alter would say that that's our problem because we want all the I's dotted and all the T's crossed. He said back then they just threw stories together. It's a collage. This is going back to the collage idea. He wasn't even concerned about consistency. This drives us nuts. It drove rabbis later nuts too, by the way. Whoever told this story, it makes no sense. Anybody reading this? That's why I said in this chapter, it goes nuts. First of all, you have to ask, why would somebody choose one over the other? Nanette gave a really good example of why, but that shows a bias on the part of the storyteller, right? Because it doesn't speak well for God at all. Whatever you look at God, however way you look at God, any number of definitions does not speak well of God. And then God about acceptance and everything else. And then you have murder because of jealousy and anger. Cursed is the ground. The ground keeps getting cursed. All these interesting themes. And then Lilith appears Sumerian and Mesopotamian. That's fascinating how that gets jumped in together then is a parallel to Eve. I'll have to look that up. Okay, it's a little after 11. Let me say let me stop. I can't stop recording because it'll mess everything up. Let me say goodbye to you all. We will continue with Lilith next time because we can't let this go. This is a very, very fascinating thing. It's why I'm curious as to why this came up and why the denigration of women. I don't get this. I'm trying to figure out the history of where this starts. And so we'll talk about a little about Lilith.
Just like Daniel said, male and female, I created them. So the assumption was that Adam and Lilith were created just like, male cats and dogs, male donkeys, female donkeys, female elephants, all the creatures. And that's the explanation.
No,
And
actually, Maureen, what the chapter he's taking it from, God says to it's an interesting. We're gonna deal with that chapter 2, by the way. After we finish Cain and Abel, we're gonna deal with this. The text says, and God said, "Let us." And the "us" is interesting because it's understood that God has a heavenly council. Most people never just don't see the "us." And I remember asking a long time ago, "How do you get on that council?" And somebody says, "Claus, will you shut up?" I remember I was in class. I was in seminary. I thought it was a good question. As a heavenly council, we're not told who's on the heavenly council, by the way. Seriously.
obviously there were no women on the heavenly council.
Precisely. Notice all the archangels are men. Thank you. That's a good point. So it said, "Let us create in our image." So that's a good thing. In our image. And this is written, by the way, I don't know if you knew this. Chapter 1 is a direct riff off of the Gilgamesh creation epic. Things happen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And what the scribes did, it was understood the Gilgamesh creation epic was science. There was no difference between science and religion in Babylon in 2500 BCE. They were one and the same. So what the Hebrew priests and Deuteronomists did is they said, you have the science right, the theology is wrong. There were not gods, it was Yahweh Elohim. So they eliminated the gods did this, the God did that, and you can see a direct parallel. On day 1, you can look at the Gilgamesh, you can see the parallel all the way down. The famous name was it A.E. Spicer, the famous commentator from the Anchor Bible, pointed that out in detail, how it went down, except they eliminated and changed the theology. This was obviously one, not the gods. And so creating in the image of the divine was a big deal. So it was a good thing. But this can act, I think Danny is right, as an antidote because it said male and female created them in plural. So that eliminates the and confusion with the other. But I never thought of that before. Okay, so what we're going to do is take a look at Lilith, see how that parallels with Eve. We've got Cain's wife who doesn't have a name. And then you're going to love the next thing. We got cities. Where did they come from?
Hello. I did a brief digression into the Muslim idea, and they actually do give Cain's wife a name in the Quran.
Okay, bring that up next time then. Do some research about where they get the name from. Okay. All right, Maureen, do some research about this. I didn't know.
I'll do research on Lilith and on what they say in the Quran about Cain's wife.
Okay, so we're off and running then. And then we're going to see where this leads. But again, inconvenient truths. Who are we? Where did we come from? What does that mean about our story? We have this nice house we built about all this stuff. And hey, if you take a look at some of the great telenovelas and some of the great novels and stuff, notice how many times it all falls apart because somebody was not paying attention to a great something or other that was part of the family. And suddenly somebody appears and say, guess what? I'm related to you. And they prove it. Yes, so this is not new. The idea of trying to omit some of who you are.
Actually, that happened in my family 2 generations ago or 3, I forget, but 2 brothers battled it out and they ended up never speaking again. And we didn't learn about this other side of the family until one of them from California did her genealogy, did her DNA, and followed up on the genealogy and got a connection to one of the cousins on my side of the family in New York. And now we celebrate Passover together every year, both sides of the family.
There you go.
And like I shared in the chat, my in-laws hid the fact that they were part African origin because they wanted to believe they were Portuguese and Chinese, but their great, my father-in-law, his great-grandmother was actually a Black woman, an enslaved Black woman. And he hid this for forever until one of his nieces, his brother's daughter did DNA and it came out that they were part African. So the jig was up. It's like, yeah, you are part Black. And they are so prejudiced against Black people, it's ridiculous. But, you know, and they're still like, well, we're not really Black, we're Chinese. And this is from people who have the complexion of, a dark chocolate. You know, Bobby Vance, they have your complexion, Bobby. They look vaguely Chinese, vaguely Hawaiian, but they're like, no, we're not Black, we're Chinese.
This is known as willful ignorance.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, it's known as willful ignorance. It's funny. I embrace, so when I looked at the latest DNA, I've got some Balkans in me, which absolutely surprises me to no end, some Greek. I've got the obvious barbarian.
Did you redo your test or have they just been updating it?
They updated.
Okay.
I get updates all the time. And they found that based upon this, I've got some Inuit and a lot of Andean. But I've got the typical barbarian, Saxon, Viking, the Danish, and I've got Scots, Irish, and Welsh, not English. The other. And so I think that's fabulous. I think it just proves what we've all been saying. It is amazing how many people do not want to embrace who do not want to embrace, in fact, who and what they are. It's just amazing. Well, okay, where we're going next time. I will finish a recording. Again, I can't thank all of you because the recording. Let me see if I can stop recording and still say hello to all, say goodbye to you. Hold on.